In the world of wrestling, a wrestler's career can be made from just one moment. But at the same time, a wrestler's career can come crashing down even quicker, and sometimes it is entirely the fault of the wrestler themselves, whether it's realistically justified or not, the reason their career came crashing down. And today we're going to be talking about wrestlers who ruined their own careers. Make sure to subscribe right now because I know the majority of you watching aren't already, and let's get into the video. What a throwback this entry is. Remember the days of Daniel Puder when he'd get mentioned in every single wrestling list? We are so back. Puder's first exposure to a wrestling audience was when he was an entrant in the 4th edition of WWE Tough Enough, this of course being the $1 Million Tough Enough, where the winner would receive a 4-year, $250k a year deal with the WWE, and unlike previous seasons of Tough Enough though, where it was just its own standalone reality TV series, the $1 Million Tough Enough was just a weekly segment on SmackDown. And among the contestants on $1 Million Tough Enough were Ryan Reeves, who would go on to become Ryback, Mike Mizanin, and of course, Daniel Puder, amongst others. Puder was a standout on the show for the fact he was an ex-MMA fighter, something that was often brought up by other wrestlers and competitors on the show. One of the side effects of Tough Enough being on SmackDown though, which is quite obvious, was the fact that it meant they were sharing a locker room and TV time with active members of the WWE roster and members of the SmackDown brand. And this often had a crossover with active members of the roster appearing in Tough Enough segments, such as the time Big Show ran them all down in the locker room, or such as the time Kurt Angle challenged them all to a squat thrust competition. On the November 4th, 2004 episode of SmackDown, Kurt Angle would get involved with Tough Enough when he hosted a squat thrust contest, with the winner getting an amateur match against Kurt Angle as their prize. Chris Naroki won the contest, and as a result he got his match with Angle, where his ribs got broken and he was tapped out in just moments. And following this match, Angle thought he would then challenge Daniel Puder to a match, given that Daniel Puder had an MMA background and he used it to mock him as he challenged him. Daniel Puder of course accepted, the match begun, and very quickly Daniel Puder got in control of Kurt Angle when he locked in a Kimura lock on Kurt Angle's arm. A Kimura lock that sure as hell was about to break Kurt Angle's arm until the referee had to intervene and count a shoot 3 count on Puder's shoulders, which weren't fully entirely down. Something that was done to save Kurt Angle's arm from being snapped by Daniel Puder. It was a very strange moment, but nonetheless, Tough Enough would continue, with Daniel Puder going on to win the contest and win that 4-year, $250k a year contract. And he would make his official debut for the WWE in the Royal Rumble match 2005, and when he entered the Royal Rumble match, he was given a very warm welcome, to say the least. He entered at number 3 and would spend 4 minutes getting chopped up by Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and Hardcore Holly before he was dumped out by Hardcore Holly, being the first elimination of the match. Just a complete burial for a debut in the WWE, and a punishment for what he had done to Kurt Angle. And this would also end up being his final ever match on the WWE main roster. He was demoted to OVW for developmental purposes, but he would only last 8 months later before he was released from his contract and was never seen again in the WWE. Ken Anderson signed for the WWE in February of 2005 and was sent to Ohio Valley Wrestling to develop his skills, and he would remain there for 6 months, though he claims that when he arrives, Jim Cornette was in charge of OVW at the time and did not see potential in Anderson, and as a result he would only ever wrestle occasionally for OVW. But then, Paul Heyman would arrive to replace Jim Cornette when he departed from OVW, and Paul Heyman showed immediate interest in Ken Anderson and saw major potential in him, and just 5 weeks after Paul Heyman was made in charge of OVW, Ken Anderson was called up to the main roster, and he would change his name to what we all knew it as throughout his time in the WWE, which was Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy would debut on the main roster in 2005 in August, and would go on to have a bit of a win streak and an undefeated streak while on the SmackDown brand, before he would lose that to Eddie Guerrero in November. Just a month later, Kennedy would get injured in a tour in Italy and would be out for 6 months. but WWE clearly really wanted to push this guy, because when he came back 6 months later, they were straight back to pushing him, and in September of 2006, he would win the United States Championship, winning his first title in the WWE. Mr. Kennedy, while champion, would engage in feuds with the likes of The Undertaker and Chris Benoit, the latter of which he would lose the United States title to. He would have a World Championship match with Batista at 2007's Royal Rumble event, and he was involved in the 2007 Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 23, which he would win, giving him a world title contract that he could cash in at any time. He would announce on the April 30th edition of Raw that he would be cashing it in 11 months' time at WrestleMania 24. However, just a week later, he put his briefcase on the line in a match against Edge, and he would lose the briefcase to Edge. And unfortunately, during his match with Edge, he sustained an injury to his muscle, and as a result was out of action for a long time, and was not able to regain his briefcase. Later that year in September, Mr. Kennedy was suspended from the WWE for 30 days in accordance to their wellness policy, as he was one of 11 wrestlers who were implicated in a steroid scandal. WWE at the time apparently were planning a storyline in which Mr. Kennedy was going to be revealed as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son, but as a result of this suspension, that storyline was scrapped, and we of course ended up with Hornswoggle as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son. He would float around on the roster for another 2 or 3 years, however he was no longer a major player in the company anymore. On the May 25th, 2009 episode of Raw, he was part of that weird 5v5 Lakers vs Cavaliers match in which he botched a backdrop on Randy Orton, and 4 days later he was released from his WWE contract, and this was as a result of that botch. Anderson claims in interviews that Randy Orton complained to management about Kennedy being reckless in the ring, citing that botched backdrop and saying that this could have ended his career as it caused Orton to land on his head and neck. Kennedy would of course go on to join TNA, where he did pretty well for himself under the name of Mr. Anderson, however he has never appeared again for the WWE. Eva Marie signed for the WWE in May of 2013 when she claims that she came across a casting call for the WWE by chance and impressed during a 4-week-long tryout. And the first order of business with her since signing her WWE contract was to add her to the brand new reality show that was debuting titled Total Divas, a reality show that went behind the scenes of the lives of WWE divas, airing on the E! Network. And let's be real, this was probably the main reason that Eva Marie was signed in the first place, just to star on this show. She was wrestling on the main roster, having had just 2 weeks of formal training, and in her performances and her matches, it very clearly showed she was called up far too quickly. She mainly wrestled in tag matches and multi-person matches such as battle royales or gauntlets or any multi-person tag team match, and the occasional time she did compete in a singles match, it usually wasn't the greatest. In November of 2015, she would go inactive with the WWE for a while due to injury, and during this time she would start training with Brian Kendrick. She would make her return to WWE, this time in NXT in June of 2015, and she seemed to have a bit of new skill behind her. She was clearly a lot of a better wrestler. Still not great, but she was actually starting to get a decent reaction from the Full Sail crowd. That was until she had a match against Billie Kay in which she forgot to kick out, and the referee had to stop at a 2 count, and you could tell that she had forgot to kick out. The crowd turned on her, and it was kinda over for her in NXT from there. She did have an alliance with Nia Jax and did even compete for the title against Bayley and Asuka, but she was never to win the NXT Women's Championship, and she was called back up to the main roster in 2016. She was drafted to SmackDown in the 2016 SmackDown draft, and she would begin a character in SmackDown where it was actually quite interesting. She was playing a heel who was just finding any excuse to not appear for her matches. Whether it was a wardrobe malfunction, being stuck in traffic, or anything, Eva Marie would find an excuse not to compete in a match. She was scheduled to be part of a 6-woman tag match at that year's SummerSlam event, however, she would be replaced by Nikki Bella as she was suspended for 30 days on August 18th for violating the company's wellness policy. Eva Marie claims that she tested positive for Adderall, that she had a prescription for the medication, but submitted the paperwork after the deadline, and this caused some angry tweets from her husband towards the WWE, which probably can't have been good for her. and yeah, she never appeared for the WWE ever again after the suspension. She actually stayed within the company for close to a year after, before she announced on August 4th, 2017 that she had parted ways with the WWE. Sensationally, she actually returned to the WWE in 2021, however this run did not last very long. It was very uninspired, she got booed and hated throughout all of it, and she was released that same year from budget cuts due to the pandemic. Though Eva Marie to this day is expressing interest in a return again to the WWE, and if it did happen, to be honest, I wouldn't be very surprised.